Thank you very much. What a lovely introduction. That made me feel wonderful. Yes, welcome to Earthscope and to the How to Build Sustainable Culture workshop that we are about to deliver. This is half talk, half interactive workshop. Okay, without further ado, we would like to welcome you to Building Sustainable Cultures, Profits with Purpose and People with Impact. By the end of this workshop and talk, we want you to go away knowing exactly what we mean when we're talking sustainable culture. We also want you to know why we should be building them into our organizations and how we can build them in our organizations. So what, why, and how. It's a very simple agenda we've got for you today. So I've had a bit of an introduction, but I'll just introduce myself a little bit more so that you know who I am, and then hopefully we get to learn about you as we go throughout this session. I am Sarah Mercer. I am an award-winning communicator, presenter, and facilitator and have delivered climate and nature education and training to over 10,000 people across the world, including to companies like PepsiCo, Unilever, Universal Studios, Ben & Jerry's, very delicious, and the NHS as well. I have a background in glaciology from Durham University, and I've worked with Isle of Man charities, Culture Vannin and Isle of Play. And more recently, I've been working with the sustainability training company Aim High Earth, and as you heard, the social enterprise Earthscope as well, which you will hear more about in just a moment. I bring a variety of perspectives to the challenge that is talking about sustainability in a way that brings people with us and puts people at the center of that conversation. I was born in Liverpool, hence my really strong Scouse accent, right? But I moved here when I was 2, and I am so proud to call the Isle of Man, as we've heard lots today, the world's only UNESCO Biosphere nation, my home, but also incredibly proud to feel the wealth of energy, expertise, and potential that the people in this room and the rest of the Isle of Man have. So thank you all for being here as well, and for your energy and expertise today.
And hello, my name's Matthew Warren. I'm the other half of Earthscope Isle of Man. Now, my background's slightly different to Sarah's. I'm trained as a composer, of all things. I was a musician, composer, sociological researcher, lectured at Durham University for a while before coming over to the Isle of Man to co-found Earthscope. Now, what's someone with that background doing standing up here talking to you about sustainability? Well, it all has to do with this word, culture. We're going to come back to this so much today. Humans have known about anthropogenic climate change, that is, we're having an impact on the climate, since the late 19th century. It's not a new bit of science. Our knowledge on it is not new, although it's continually developing. So, why haven't we done anything about it yet? Why are emissions still rising? Well, the answer is that word. Culture. Sustainability is not yet built into the modern organizations and cultures that we work in. And so, actually, the answer isn't to have just another climate scientist, sorry, Sarah, up talking about sustainability to you. The answer is we all need to be talking about sustainability. Sustainability is to do with culture, it's to do with every sector, it's to do with every job. Every job is a sustainability job. So we need to be able to talk to the arts. We need to be able to talk to research and academia. We need to be able to talk to finance and industry. We need all sectors to be engaged. So really, if you're not talking about sustainability, the question is to you, why not?
And with that, we would like to introduce Earthscope, which you have heard a little bit about now, which is the Isle of Man social enterprise that Matthew and I founded. Earthscope delivers sustainability training, transformation, and accreditation so that your hard work is recognized around the world. And you can continue to support both the island and the world's transformation into one that embeds sustainability. We were very, very privileged recently to receive the UNESCO Biosphere Isle of Man Award for Education in just our first year of existence, and have been delivering the Isle of Man public bodies sustainability training through the Carbon Literacy Project, having trained over 400 members of staff already, including Tynwald and the majority of the Chief Officers Group. And we are on track to be the first parliament in the world to be carbon literate, which is a huge milestone. Earthscope also developed content for the hugely successful Aim High Earth session delivered to almost 1,000 people in TV and film industry for BAFTA Albert, co-delivered by myself with a Q&A panel with Ade Apatan MBE and Dame Pippa Harris, which was a really good fun event. And Earthscope also took on hosting the UNESCO Biosphere Sustainable Man sessions this year, which many of you in this room came to, so thank you for that. Where over 80% of attendees reported they were more able to make changes and more motivated to do so, already feeling the benefits of that culture change. So we'd like to begin this workshop on how to build sustainable cultures by starting with asking you a few questions. And I just want you to answer this one question. How do you feel about sustainability within your organization? So I'm just going to give a few moments for people to pop their answers in now. I always feel like we should have music in these sections. So we've got a few options there. Currently, my organization does some things in sustainability, but is not the priority. Oh, okay, organization taking it seriously, but isn't leading the way. Really glad to see 3%. Very low number there on my organization doesn't consider sustainability at all. That's massive. That's really exciting. Okay, I think we've got most people in the room now. So what has won? My organization is taking it seriously, but it's not yet leading the way. Second, my organization does some things in sustainability, but it's not yet the priority. Okay, I've got a second question for you now then. How capable do you feel to bring further sustainability into your organization? How capable do you feel to bring sustainability into your organization? Lots of different answers coming through now. I really like it when it's live. This is great. So we've got lots of very capable people, lots of somewhat capable, a few not capable. Okay, so overall there, we just had a takeover at that last moment. We've got most people feeling very capable or somewhat capable to bring sustainability into their organizations. That is fantastic, because something that we're about to talk about is how important this essence and this idea of leadership, that's not necessarily meaning you need to be C-suite, but leading on this when bringing that through your organization, as well as C-suite involvement as well. Brilliant. These numbers are incredibly useful. And I'm going to hand it over to Matthew for the next stage.
Yeah, so these numbers are so important, this reflection is so important because it matters. It matters to how successful an organization's sustainability efforts are. So one recent study found that only 2% of corporate sustainability efforts achieve their goals. Now, if we all feel like, lots of us feel at least somewhat capable, or quite capable, and we feel like our organizations are doing something, why are so many sustainability efforts still failing? Well, one of the things that we focus on, and that is crucial to this whole issue of how to build successful sustainability efforts, is how embedded sustainability is. So sustainability values in these instances are not embedded. At the moment, most sustainability most businesses look something like this. They have departments. Your business structure will vary, but you have departments like legal and finance, executive leadership, and so on. And then where does sustainability sit with that? Well, it's probably might be something quite peripheral. A lot of organizations have maybe a sustainability team who may even have that as a voluntary add-on to their role, or even just a sustainability officer who's particularly passionate. So this ends up being added on to another role or another department, and so the sustainability effort is not embedded throughout. Really, what we're looking for should be more like this, where sustainability principles, the kind of principles and values we're going to talk about today, are integrated throughout this whole operation. So every department's thinking about it. As I said right at the top, every job needs to be a sustainability job. It needs to have that relationship to what are the long-term values we're aiming for.
So there are three main factors in successful sustainability transformations. So sustainability transformations that have achieved the goals that they set out to do. And the first one is leadership support. So again, what I spoke about just then about people within that organization who have the capability and the knowledge to bring this to their organization. And also C-suite and broader high-level action, that important word action, that create the energy and momentum needed for sustainability to thrive. The next thing is employee engagement. Because without employee engagement, staff can fail to see the necessity or even the benefits of sustainability, and therefore it doesn't get prioritized. It falls to the bottom of the list. And finally, goals and metrics, and hardwiring those goals into your organization's accountability systems and incentives. And this creates a clear understanding of who is responsible for implementing the sustainability transformation at every level in the business. Notice how all of these things both drive culture and are affected by it. We're going to get into how to build these into your organizations later on in this workshop. But before we get there, it's important to understand what we mean by culture. What do we mean by culture? So let's ask some business leaders. This is what a few business leaders said culture was. A coordination mechanism. The tone for what type of company this is. A belief system. 93% of business leaders think that culture is value-based. They believe that the culture of an organization is grounded in a specific set of values, such as collaboration, community orientation, adaptability, and so on. So what we mean when we talk about culture are shared values and shared norms. Values are those beliefs about what's good or worthwhile. And norms are the ways in which these values come to play in a culture through our behaviors, our decisions, and our interactions. And what drives values and norms? Leadership, engaged employees, and metrics. Okay, over to you, Matthew.
Okay, so we're going to talk a bit more about what those values might look like, what sustainability values look like, and how to build them into culture. But first of all, does anyone recognize this lion? This is really interactive. Anyone recognize this lion?
Samson.
What was that?
Samson.
Samson. Oh, yeah, you're skipping ahead. Brilliant. Do you know what product it's from? Yeah, Lyle's Golden Syrup. Absolutely. It's the unmistakable centerpiece of Lyle's Golden Syrup. Now, why am I bringing up Lyle's Golden Syrup? And I'm glad to see that the finance sector has a healthy complement of bakers within it. Well, this packaging actually holds the Guinness World Record for the oldest unchanged packaging in the world. And yeah, it's an illustration from the Old Testament. The story goes, Samson kills a lion and then comes back later and finds that the lion's body has been inhabited by bees. So sometimes people think those are flies above the lion. Those are actually bees creating honey. Hence the quote at the bottom, out of the strong came forth sweetness. Now, why am I talking about this? Well, because it actually illustrates something central to sustainability thinking. In the 19th century, a byproduct of sugar refining was a thick, dark, bitter syrup. It wasn't used for human consumption, it seemed just to be a waste byproduct. However, when Abraham Lyle took over the Glebe sugar refinery in Greenock, he thought about it slightly differently. With two chemists, he managed to create from this byproduct, from this waste, a process whereby this substance could be turned into a sweet, honey-like golden syrup. That same golden syrup that we enjoy today. They started selling it, and it grew in popularity, and until it became what we know today. And their factory in London produced 40,000 cans per day in 2019. That's almost 10 million in the year. And so, out of something that was seen as waste, seen as worthless, valueless, came forth sweetness, came forth value. a value that's persisted in essentially the same form to this day. Creating value from the undervalued. That's surely at the essence of so many kind of business ventures, from gold prospecting to value share trading. And it's also the key for you, for us, into sustainability thinking. Sustainability thinking involves reassessing the value we place on things, finding the places where we've previously undervalued things like people, resources, and the rest of nature, and finding that value for people, planet, and profit.
Thank you. Matthew has moved my microphone. Very rude. Not that tall. The issue is to do with what we are allowing ourselves to place value on and what our organisations are set up to value. Sustainable development is commonly defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So to do that, we need to value more highly those things that not only help us now, but also help us to meet our future needs. Sustainability thinking means realising that long-term success of an endeavour, such as our organisations, is reliant on the broader health of people and planet right now. And the way that we do that, as we just said, is to urgently reassess where we place value. So let's take a look at what that really means. If I want a cup of tea right now, I can just go into my cupboard in my house and get out a tea bag, make myself a cup of tea. I've got all the things I need. Probably could just go into the side room and get one there. But if I want a cup of tea in 50 years' time, then I'm going to need to think about a huge range of factors. Will I still be able to get hold of tea in 50 years' time? Will growers have access to the water that they need? Will changes in the climate have affected tea production? Will tea-producing regions be embroiled in conflict? Will shipping be disrupted? Will tea even still be popular in 50 years' time? Gosh, what a thought. And any number of these things can affect the future outlook for my tea drinking and the longevity of the considerable value that I get in drinking tea. And crucially, all of these questions have their roots in the present, but a much wider present than just my own kitchen cupboard. In fact, it takes us across the world to realise just how interconnected we are. From building regenerative agriculture processes in Kenyan tea farms to enhancing the resilience of key manufacturing communities, in participating in the global effort to reduce emissions to keep temperatures within safe limits. It makes us realise how a longer-term perspective necessarily involves a far broader scope of stakeholders than does my immediate tea drinking goals. And that is what the UN recognised when it established its Sustainable Development Goals, perhaps the most widely referred to framework for understanding the breadth of sustainable values across the world. All member nations of the UN adopted these in 2015 after decades of research and negotiation. And they cover a huge range of aims that the nations agreed were needed to meet our needs in the present without compromising the needs of future generations. And these goals, these values, going back to that word, are all about expanding the canvas of what we are able to consider valuable. They can guide us to incorporate a diverse range of contingencies of what is needed to keep the world in a safe and just space for development where we can thrive without compromising the life support systems that we have so far been depleting. In short, the Sustainable Development Goals call on us all to rethink our values. Those things that have been undervalued, the welfare of people, the boundaries of our living planet, and the collaborations needed to secure long-lasting development, are given an explicit and globally recognised value. So let's go back to my cup of tea. When I think about my long-planned 2050 cup of tea, delicious as it is going to be, there are all these contingencies I mentioned, the impacts of a changing climate, changing tastes, changing geopolitics. Well, the factors involved then are here. They might include clean water, SDG 6. They might involve responsible consumption and production, SDG 12. They might involve peace, SDG 16. And of course, climate action, SDG 13. A short-term view allows us only to see as far as our own kitchen cupboards. But a long-term view of value requires us to see across the world in the present to understand just how much more interconnected we are than we might think. The long-term value of our endeavours, be they tea drinking, running a pension fund, or anything else, depends on us right now being able to realise and be part of the foundations for that long-term value to be realised. And this long-term view can give us a great many different versions of how we achieve it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that there is a silver bullet to the solution here. There is no one silver bullet. Companies, industries, and communities will all have different circumstances that affect what's important in order to lay the foundations of future value. That's why we start here with these key underlying values of sustainable development, rather than with any particular approach. However, this is a workshop, not just an inspiration, so we are here to give you a few key concepts to give you a flavour of how this rethinking of values can be manifested and is being manifested. Number one is circularity. This is the idea that we can change how we value the extraction of raw materials and the output of waste because of their long-term unsustainability. In circular systems, all resource use has to be part of balanced cycles where products are designed to last, to be repaired, to be reused, and as a very last resort, to be recycled. And this approach gets us to reassess our values. In a linear or non-circular system, the ease of extraction of resources makes waste make sense. But in a circular system, things like carbon emissions, plastic waste, and the destruction of irreplaceable ecosystems are all recognized as having a negative impact on the long-term viability of the value that we're trying to create. Another one is nature restoration. And like we said earlier, we are a part of nature. We're not separate from nature. The air that we breathe, the climate we enjoy, the food that we eat, they all depend on the rest of the living world around us, our global biosphere. So restoring healthy biodiverse ecosystems is crucial to the long-term value of every industry. To take one example, 3/4 of the diversity of global crops rely on insect pollinators. So protecting and regenerating their habitats is extremely important for us. And these kinds of benefits are sometimes called ecosystem services. And the approaches we take to enhance these services are often called nature-based solutions. And I think you'll get quite a bit more of that in the next section as well, after this workshop. And the third one I want to talk about is just transition. So thank you, Hannah, for mentioning this earlier. You've brilliantly brought this up for us. And this is the term highlighting just how the value of communities has been downplayed in favour of private short-term gain. As you can see from the SDGs, a huge amount of them are devoted to making a fairer world. And what we need to ensure is that when we take action for this long-term value, we're taking into account that long-term well-being of the broad range of stakeholders that you mentioned earlier, Hannah. A pandemic of disposability has led us into a situation where we've sacrificed long-term viability for short-term value. The founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, has written that we cannot continue with an economic system driven by selfish values, such as short-term profit maximization, the avoidance of tax and regulation, or the externalizing of environmental harm. Instead, we need a society, economy, an international community that is designed to care for all people and the entire planet. That's the end of the quote. So this shortism has ignored the impacts of these so-called externalities, as well as the communities and the ecosystems that are the backbone of that value creation. And a sustainable culture is one which shares and lives out these values in the norms of its day-to-day working. It's a culture in which these values and goals are expressed in the attitudes, decisions, and interactions at every level of an organization. So, as the values are the foundation of an organizational culture, let's start thinking about what values we currently hold in our companies. And I'm going to hand over to Matthew to hand over back to you.
Yeah, so this is the point which we're hoping to get some really good insight from all of you. We want to find out a bit about your organization, about its values, and about what it values. Now, they are potentially two very similar sounding concepts, but what we want you to do is remember or find out, if you don't already know, what your organization's explicit values are. So most organizations will have a mission statement or a value statement of some sort in which they will tell you, these are the things that we think we value as an organization. I looked up Zurich, as we're Zurich sponsors. I looked up Zurich's values just before we came on. Focus on customers, simplify, innovate. Explicit values of Zurich. So that's what we're looking for this first question. Okay. Hopefully you've managed to get some values down there. We have a huge diversity of values up here. We were wondering whether we'd just have like the same 5 values repeated verbatim for every company, but it's nice to see a real diversity. At the same time, we can see some patterns in here. So respect, that comes up a few times in terms of teamwork and collaboration and these kind of things, how we interact with other people in a respectful way. Loyalty up there as well. Integrity. Again, that's one that not only is the one in the middle there that's been mentioned verbatim the most times, but also one that comes back in things like trust, for example, and transparency, responsible transparency. So some really good values up here. That's to get you starting thinking about what values mean to your organization. That was the easy question. This is the trickier question. Now I want you to, this is going to be more of a discussion because you can't just look this one up. This is more about your experience. So what we want to do is the same kind of exercise, but ask you, what does your organization actively value? So this can be things that are rewarded in like very formal structures like pay, compensation, and these kinds of things. It can be something that's in policies, but it can also be all those things that just happen on a day-to-day basis. What's your interactions like with other people, managers, colleagues, other people you work with, stakeholders? What are all those interactions like, and what does your organization actively value and reward you and your colleagues for, both in formal and informal means? Fantastic. Okay, so we can see up here a slightly different set of values. Actually, there's a lot that does fit into the values we talked about on the previous slide. So things like community. Well, how do we build community? It's those things like trust and respect and that we had on that previous slide of stated values. So it's clear there's some relationship between stated values and the values we actually experience. They've gone now because I think no one else wrote them, but I'm intrigued by the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. We just had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as numbers up there a while ago. Growth, transparency, innovation, education, all these great values that come out in those behaviors, in those networks of formal organizational principles and more informal ways of operating. And sustainability is up there as well. Not the largest one, but it is up there, and we're glad to see that in a forum like this, it is on that board. What our question is what would it look like if every value, both on the last slide and on this side, every value you put up there, had sustainability as part of it? So what does sustainable community look like? What does sustainable transparency look like? What does sustainable growth look like? These are the questions that get to the heart of what sustainable culture is. So as we go on, think about those values that you've just highlighted as being important to your organization, both in the practical day-to-day and in the mission and goals of your organization. And think about, okay, what would it look like if those were interwoven with sustainability? We run, as Sarah's already said, the public sector carbon literacy training project. So we train people in the public sector. In fact, there are people in this room today who have already sat through 8 hours of us and our training. And when we do that training, it's not just about bringing a new thing to add on to the organization, to go, oh, now you have to do this thing. Actually, what's vital to getting people to do things about sustainability is to embed it in their existing values. So these are the 3 values, public sector values that come out of the Island Plan: security, vibrancy, and sustainability. So one of the top 3 is sustainability. Fantastic. That's not actually what we emphasize to people. What we emphasize is that what we talk about in sustainability doesn't just sit in that one category. It doesn't sit in that peripheral, just on the edge of the organization space. Actually, sustainability is to do with security. If we think about energy security, for example, how we achieve that is deeply entwined with sustainability. It's to do with vibrancy. If we think about what do we want our communities to look like, what do we want our organizations to look like, what do we want our economy to look like, what does vibrancy look like, then what does sustainable vibrancy look like? And once we start adding this value, this way of thinking, into all of the values we're heading for, into all of the missions, into all of the objectives we have as individuals and organizations and as a country, then we're starting to think in terms of sustainable culture. Then we're starting to think in terms of truly embedded sustainable culture.
Okay, so we've talked about the what a sustainable culture is. Now I want to go into why, though I am going to keep this section brief because we have had some fantastic people this morning talking about why we should be doing any of this. So, why should we build a sustainable culture? Firstly, it's got loads of benefits. Study after study after study, and I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, list the benefits of building in sustainable cultures. And remember, building sustainable culture is important for a successful sustainability transformation. So you need the culture to have a successful sustainability transformation, as the stats at the beginning of this workshop said. So competitive advantages, this is a really quick one, easy one. Innovation, which is one of the main values that you've just expressed. Financial advantages, people who mentioned growth and revenue. You've got employee engagement, increased employee engagement. We mentioned earlier that there is what was the term? A war on employee, trying to bring employees in and staff. I can't remember the exact term. But trying to bring in people of skill and ability to our organizations and offering them something of value in return. And then longevity and that broader stakeholder impact. So not just being good for your own business, but then having that the thriving of your business be good for the world around you and the stakeholders that you interact with. So not only are there massive benefits, and if you want to go into any of this more, we have loads of sources that we'll share with you at the end. But there are also loads of risks for not embedding a sustainable culture. Number one, reputational damage, and this is happening increasingly with organizations. Two, competitive disadvantages. If you're not taking advantage of the opportunities that are springing up left, right, and center, then you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage to your competitors, both on a national scale and an organizational scale. Supply chain risks, again, particularly in an increasingly volatile world, having strong, resilient supply chains is hugely important for those of us who have them. And then you've got your legal and regulatory work that's coming in as well. And again, we are not the best people to speak on that. There are much better people in this room who can get really into this if you have questions on this. And also, not only are there benefits to having a sustainable culture, risks for not having a sustainable culture, it really is no longer an option to continue business as usual. And that's not me standing up here as a climate educator. That's people from companies around the world, from research centers and the data about how we can live in a way that is compatible with a livable future. International organizations, governments, and business leaders, again, across the world. And it isn't just coming from sustainability companies and sustainability business leaders and governments who are interested in sustainability. It's coming from agriculture. It's coming from social justice backgrounds, it's coming from healthcare, it's coming from education, it's coming from legal, and it's coming from a multitude of different sectors. So this is being called for, that business as usual is no longer an option. And I've got some quotes, and I'm sure many of you have seen these already, but I think these really just bring home that it's not just us standing up here saying that this is the case, that people around the world in multiple different industries are saying this. Companies that don't adapt to climate change will go bankrupt without question, a quote from the Bank of England. Carrying on with business as usual is neither environmentally viable nor economically sensible, an article published in the Financial Times. Business as usual is not delivering on what we need to prevent catastrophic consequences. From the International Monetary Fund, the European Commission, and the World Trade Organization collectively. It can no longer be a choice to align the interests of people, planet, and profit. That's from the Better Business Act, which is supported by the Institute of Directors, amongst many, many other stakeholders. And I think this one really says it nicely, a quote from KPMG: "The time for tinkering is over." So there are massive benefits to embedding sustainable culture. There are huge risks for not embedding sustainable culture, and business as usual is simply no longer an option. We're not standing up here feeling very naive that it's all right, tomorrow you can just embed sustainability cultures. It's easy peasy, don't worry about it. We know that there are challenges and that there are hurdles. That's why we exist, to help companies to bring that sustainable culture in. So we want to really understand what are the hurdles that companies on the island and further afield are facing when it comes to embedding sustainable cultures. So I love to see that as an education social enterprise, education is front and center there. Thank you all very much for that. But there's quite a lot of other things there as well. So we've got fear of change is a really big one, and that's such a true one when we look into how to build culture change in any capacity. That fear of change is a huge one. Time. Do any of us have the time and capacity to start embedding some of the things that are required for this? We've got resistance to change. We need to survive as well as do sustainability. A bit of short-termism thinking, lack of urgency, the sort of financial in various different formats there. Where is the profit in this? Understanding where the profit is in this. Understanding what we are trying to achieve. Where's the direction? What is the plan here? Why are we doing sustainability? What's the purpose? Lack of skills, regulations, political appetites, nobody's day job. So there's loads and loads of things there. Cost coming up, big one in the middle there as well. Okay, I've made you think about hurdles now. But I'm now going to turn it on its head, I'm afraid, and I am going to make you think about opportunities. And this question is split into two parts, which I recognize is fairly confusing, so we'll have to pick out the answers. But number one, what opportunities are there in your organization to start to overcome some of those hurdles? So if we say cost is one of them, what might the opportunities be there for building a business case for how this could actually be a financial benefit for your organization? And therefore, cost becomes less of a hurdle. That's just one example, but I'm going to leave it up to your expertise because you know your organizations best. And the second question there is, what potential benefits might sustainable culture have for your organization? If you have a really thoroughly embedded sustainable culture throughout your organization, going back to that big circle surrounding your organization and being embedded throughout it, what benefits might that have for your organization? Might there be financial benefits? Be specific to your organization as well. So we've got a lot of things coming on here. What opportunities are there to overcome? What potential benefits might sustainable culture have for your organization? We've got mentions of staff, education, business. That's how we can start to overcome some of these things. Opportunities, training for senior leadership, education for staff, create niches for smaller businesses, employee incentives. So there's a lot of things coming out here, and there's a lot of opportunities to explore, and actually we'll be pulling together a report of all of these things after today's workshop, so we can come into a bit more detail about these as we publish that report, so keep an eye on Earthscope and what we are putting out. But we're going to move now to the how. We've talked about what a sustainable culture is, we've talked about why. We're now going to get really into the nitty-gritty of how. I'm going to hand over to Matthew to start.
Yeah, and this comes to really tackling some of those hurdles that you've identified. And I should say that if we had a full workshop to do with you, if we had like half a day with you, then we would be getting into all these hurdles and trying to work out with you what your action plans might look like, what the specifics of your organization might look like. But this is a flavor. This is a flavor of some of the things that we can think about. So how can we make this journey, this paradigm shift from a crisis of unsustainability to a new normal of long-term prosperity? Well, if we think about the nuts and bolts of business, it might seem like we could just put into place some targets, create a strategy, and then there we go, sustainability sorted. But recall what we said at the beginning. Only 2% of sustainability efforts actually succeed in their goals. Why? Because they're not embedded into sustainability. When sustainability is done right, every step of the journey should involve culture change. Every step of the journey can be part of forming the values at play in a corporate culture. So during this section, we're going to look at a bit of what kind of measures you might take to engage in a transition, but more importantly, what we want to explore is how you can engage that journey with the transformation of culture. And the key to this, we suggest, is ownership. And it actually came up as on one of the values slides, I think, a sense of ownership. So how can we give people a sense of ownership? Well, there's actually been a huge amount of research on the idea of ownership, sometimes called psychological ownership, to distinguish it from legal ownership. And it turns out that there are three main factors in what makes people feel like they have a sense of ownership over something like a sustainability strategy. Well, the first one is, do we know about it? What's our knowledge level like towards the issue? The second one is, do we feel like we can do anything about it? What's our agency like towards the issue? And the third one, do we feel we are the kind of people who would care about it? So these three aspects that feed into a sense of ownership and therefore into a sense of motivation, engagement, and genuine culture change are the three we're going to focus on.
Okay, so let's get into it properly. The first thing is to get your bearings. This broadening of understanding of stakeholders is your first step on this journey to build a sustainable culture. And this is a thought that is reflected in a number of models for such change. Boston Consulting Group, for instance, developed a model for sustainable transformation in business called Sustainable Business Model Innovation. And in this, they call this broadening of perspective the expanding the business canvas. And it involves asking, what systems are your business practices embedded in? What are the long-term trends and risks associated with these systems? And who are the stakeholders in these systems? And from that, we can begin to understand how supply chains, investments, investors, employees, customers, communities, and the rest of nature, or in essence, our biosphere, may all be part of our expanded business canvas. And with our extended group of biosphere stakeholders, we can start to consider the role that they can play. And this is the first stage at which we can start to look to generate ownership over our sustainability efforts. Ownership that has the potential to genuinely transform corporate values. And the participation of stakeholders in The participation of stakeholders in the decision-making process can make sustainability efforts more effective and more durable so that you can see the values coming back to your business of those efforts. Okay, Matthew.
Yeah, so you've got your bearings, then you're ready to set your goals. And again, this is something that's absolutely vital to sustainability strategies, but it's also somewhere where the engagement of that broadened palette of stakeholders becomes really important. Engagement with stakeholders can help to align those stakeholder interests. Remember, this is a vastly kind of broadened idea of stakeholders that includes nature, it includes communities, it includes supply chains, it includes customers. It's all of the things that we were talking about in the Just Transition talk earlier. How can we incorporate those stakeholders into the process? So let's consider this kind of alignment of goals and broader stakeholders. When the food and confectionery giant Mars thinks about sustainability, you might think cocoa. And you're not wrong. Cocoa makes up a huge amount of their environmental footprint, and they've done loads of work in things like sustainability farming and development of resilient plants and training farmers. But perhaps more surprising is they actually do a huge amount of work in coral reefs. They planted 900,000 coral fragments in reefs, on artificial reefs in Indonesia to try and restore those ecosystems. Why? Because they also have a pet food chain, which buys up a load of fish, and they recognize that their wider stakeholder group involves the coral reefs themselves. It involves the natural systems on which they rely. When it comes to engaging people, this is where we can get that kind of buy-in, that kind of ownership that we might be looking for genuine cultural transformation. So engaging people in the setting of goals is really vital. And then once you've set out those goals, of course, there's going to come a stage of working out the course. And we hear a lot about kind of resistance to change. It's a hurdle that came up on the Slido a few slides ago. And that kind of cultural drag is a real problem. But actually, it turns out, again, one of the key ways of overcoming that, one of the key opportunities, is stakeholder engagement. Stakeholders that include employees, they include customers, include suppliers. Genuine, deep engagement with stakeholders gives them that sense of buy-in that means that actually you can find common goals, common ground, and create the kind of culture shift that you need to see.
Okay, so we've got our direction now. Now we want to embed that sustainable culture. And the first step of this is getting people on board. And if we've already done the hard work previously to this of giving people ownership, then that makes getting people on board much, much easier. That then needs to be followed up with ongoing concerted effort to keep those people on board and expand what that stakeholder group looks like. One study of management accountants in Finland looked at their relationship to sustainability. And despite the interviewees being senior and some even having business partner status, they found that almost all interviewed weren't part of the firm's sustainability efforts. And they saw it as someone else's job, something in employee well-being or even health and safety, that periphery vision again. And remember that diagram, contrasting that peripheral and embedded sustainability? But what do these people have in common? The researchers found that they had little sense of direct control over, knowledge about, or role identity invested in sustainability. And in short, they felt no ownership over sustainability, and so obviously took no interest in it. So what can we do about that? One of the key challenges of sustainability is this issue of ownership. How can people feel ownership over an issue that is vast, often intangible, and long-term? It's not a new dilemma. Charities and organisations have been trying to solve it for a very long time. Has anyone come across twinning toilets? There's some in Peel Cathedral and all over the island, Portsmouth Area Commissioners. It's this idea where in public loos there is a sign with a picture of a loo that is twinned in another country. And it's a fundraising initiative that's been running for about 15 years. And it's a great way to solve this exact problem. It gives the owner and even the user of that loo a feeling of ownership. Not only do you get your certificate with a photo, but also GPS coordinates to get a sense of what that ownership is really doing, that concrete idea of impact. And this kind of technique is not limited to these specific small-scale effects. It's the engine of purpose-driven corporate culture. So how can we harness the sense of ownership to fuel a sustainable culture?
Well, as we've mentioned, continued cultural embedding relies on people, be it employees, customers, shareholders, any other stakeholders, including nature and the wider biosphere, having some element of knowledge and agency on the issue. The Finnish management accountant, as Sarah said, didn't have that sense of knowledge, sense of agency. So, how can we engage people on an ongoing basis? Well, it turns out the knowledge section of that sense of ownership is absolutely crucial. To those giant intangible issues, actually when we know more about them, we're more personally invested. We see it as more part of our identity and our role, and we're more willing to get on board in a genuine, intrinsically motivated way than if it's some external motivations, just like metrics or targets. Well, actually, if you teach people about the why, the wider issue, then they can connect with what can be otherwise large, intransigent issues. So a culture of ownership has to be at the heart of this ongoing sustainability effort. And there is a great deal of research about what makes effective training and what kind of really brings people on board, and that's things like involving them. If we got into dissecting it, which we won't do now, then you'd actually find out that, hang on, weren't they doing that just earlier this session? We have used some of those in this session. There is a whole kind of art to how you bring people into training and give people that buy-in. Sarah's now going to talk a little bit more about the leadership angle, though.
Yes, so the next step in this is empowering leadership. Keeping sustainability going requires culture-transforming engagement. And it needs clear and courageous leadership, again, from leaders, but also leaders within that organization who want to bring this in. both for the direction setting, as we saw on the last slide, and for the continuing embedding, as we're seeing on this one. There are many qualities of different leadership, not to mention different styles, and you'll likely have your own experiences with this. We're just going to highlight a few key qualities. And a key starting point is to consider who is being represented in decision-making. You now have a clear picture of the stakeholders intertwined in long-term value creation. How are you, as a leader, bringing those people into the ongoing direction and embedding of your company and its sustainability culture? The most notable versions of actions of this in recent years are additions to companies' boards such as a representative of the rest of nature, such as the toiletries company Faith in Nature and the Better Business Network have both done as well. So a tree on your board sounds fantastic. Leaders also need to demonstrate an awareness of the interconnectedness of their organization's value with a host of the other factors and stakeholders, and facilitate that ownership-inducing engagement. And also, the demonstration of ethical leadership is a really powerful fuel for sustainable company culture. Even if that's not ethical necessarily in terms of sustainability, that's just trust and honesty and openness. So being an ethical leader brings people along in sustainability, whether you're trying to or not. Okay, so we've talked direction, we've talked embedding. Now we're going to talk assessing your impact. So how can you get this kind of trust, and how can you express this kind of openness and honesty when it comes to reflecting your sustainability position? Much of what makes an effective leader in sustainability relates back to that transparency. Transparency gives people the knowledge to feel ownership over those sustainability efforts. It's been identified as a key pillar of sustainability leadership and a driver of meaningful change. So when we do transparent reporting, that's a way to make sure that that organization is making real progress. And it also allows you to review and rework future plans. It's also a way of propelling corporate change. In one study, 94% of corporate respondents said that their sustainability reporting had facilitated change in their company. So there's multiple levers we can start to pull on to start embedding this and continue embedding this in our organizations. One of the key lessons learned in that study was that staff should have significant involvement in developing these reports. And again, this highlights just how important stakeholder engagement is at every stage of the process. Many companies also link performance reviews and even performance-related pay to sustainability efforts. Ørsted, for example, has a 30% weighting for ESG incentives in their shared KPIs, and are even extending the scheme to try and embed a more wide-ranging sustainability culture. But culture isn't just revealed in the macro-level picture of a company's sustainability, but also the micro-level. Whilst absolutely metrics are essential, we also need to be able to understand culture through what it means to individuals in their day-to-day. Do people talk about sustainability in your everyday conversations over lunch in the canteen? Are pertinent issues on the agenda in meetings and performance reviews, not just in sustainability meetings, but in all your meetings? Do people talk with enthusiasm about how cool where they work is, what the purpose of that workplace is? Do they feel ownership about what is happening with the sustainability transformation? Corporate culture is hard to realize, or corporate culture change, but it's also the holy grail of sustainability policy. Intrinsically motivated stakeholders are the ones who will push forward the long-term value of your company and hold you and others accountable for its sustainable development. And in achieving this intrinsic motivation, their ownership, their sense of knowledge, agency, and identity towards the project is absolutely crucial. And I'm going to hand over to Matthew to wrap everything up.
Yeah, so how can we draw these threads together? Well, a few key things we're hoping that you'll take forward through the rest of today and back into your workplace. Firstly, build those sustainable values, but not alone. Think about that long-term view and that broad stakeholder view. Try and bring those into how you create values. Then bring people with you, and that involves giving them ownership, not just telling them what we're going to do, whether they like it or not. Give people a sense of ownership, and they will come with you. And then learn to tell your sustainable culture story. Culture is built on stories, and we are creatures of stories, and we need to be able to tell a convincing story about the culture we're trying to build. Fortunately, on the Isle of Man, as has been mentioned several times today, we actually have a built narrative to feed into. And that's Biosphere Isle of Man. We actually have a way, this is a way for us to talk about our mission and our purpose and how that links into the wider community, the wider ecological picture, and the wider world. So, with that, we'll wrap up, and you can find more details of a lot of the resources we used to create this talk via this link. I think they'll also go out after the talk. Do feel free to get in touch with us if you'd like to talk more about any of these issues or about capacity building in your organizations. Thank you very much.